Welcome, class, to Robin Hood. Glad to be joining with you again today. Hope you're excited to continue to read and go on this adventure with Robin Hood and his merry men. This week we are reading chapters 6 through 10, and again I'm going to split this video up into two parts. That way it's easier for me to do the reading because for me it is a lot of reading, and so if I can break it down into smaller sections it makes it easier for me. And for you as well, if it's easier to read all chapters at once or to split it up so you read one chapter a day, Monday through Friday, or a couple chapters Monday, a couple chapters Wednesday, or a chapter on Friday. Whatever works best for you to make sure you're staying on top of reading as well as your other work. That's the goal, right? You need to set a schedule and figure out how you can just do the work that you need to each day and split it up so that you don't get overwhelmed, but that you can, cover everything that we're covering. If you have any questions or need help with anything, please reach out to me. I want to be here, and that's why I'm doing these recordings, is so that I can have more time to work with you guys in small groups or individuals. I know some are taking me up on that with math, so that's why I'm doing less live sessions and more recorded sessions, so I can have time to help you guys with the things that you're struggling with. So with that being said, let's review what we have read so far. The last section that we read, chapters 3 through 5, we read about the stories how Robin Hood became a butcher for the day and ended up working or getting into the sheriff's service, had dinner with him, and ended up seeing Little John at the dinner and was kind of confused, but knew that they were still being loyal to each other and to their band. And then we read a chapter about how Little John was pretending to be a beggar, and he beat Eric of Lincoln in basically a staff fight, and then won the arrow contest, the shooting the bow and arrow contest, and then stayed under the roof of Sheriff and ate a bunch of his food, had a fight with the cook, and then got the cook to actually join the side of the merry men. And then the last chapter that we read is how Robin Hood led the sheriff into Sherwood Forest and ended up eating some of the king's deer with the sheriff and getting 20 gold pieces from the sheriff. And the sheriff said that he would never bug them in Sherwood Forest, but he thought, who knows what's going to happen outside of Sherwood Forest. So that is where we have left off. And now in chapter 6, we are going to read how Robin Hood met Will Scarlet. Okay, so I'm going to take off my camera, take off this cool picture of Robin Hood, and we are going to dive into the story, back into Sherwood Forest and, around Nottingham. The youngster was clothed in scarlet red, and fine scarlet fine and gay. He did frisk it o'er the plain, and enchanted roundelay. Roundelay is a simple song with a line that repeats often. One fine morning, soon after the proud sheriff had been humbled, Robin Hood and Little John passed not far from the footbridge where they had fought their memorable battle and directed their steps on the brook to quench their thirst. On each side of the dusty highway stretched out broad fields of tender young wheat. On the far side of the fields rose the sturdy oaks and beeches and ashes of the forest. At their feet, violets peeped out shyly and greeted them with a fragrance that made their hearts glad. Once they reached the bank of the brook, the two friends lay flat on their backs amid some clover blossoms and gazed up at the clouds in silence. Presently they heard someone coming up the round whistling gaily, as though he owned the whole world and it was made only to whistle in. "Here come a cheery bird," said Robin, raising up on his elbow. "Let us lie still and hope that his purse is not as light as his heart." So they lay still, and soon up came a stranger, dressed in scarlet and silk, and wearing a jaunty hat with a curling feather in it. His whole costume was scarlet, from the feather to the silk hose on his legs. A hose is close-fitting leggings like stockings that attached at the waist to a jacket. A good sword hung at his side, its scabbard all embossed with tight, tilting knights and weeping ladies. His hair was long and yellow and hung in clusters about his shoulders. Little John clucked at this sight, but then added, Not so bad a build for all his prettiness, he said. Look, those legs are strong and straight. His arms hang from his shoulders. I promise you he can use his sword right well. Nay, answered Robin, he is nothing but a lady's man from court. I'll bet my long bow against a shilling that he would run at the sight of a quarterstaff. Stay behind this bush, and I will get some sport out of him. His silk purse may hold more pennies than the law allows to one man, and sure would. So saying, Robin stepped out and planted himself in the way of the Scarlet Stranger. The latter, seeing Robin, neither slowed nor quickened his pace, but sauntered straight ahead, looking to the right and left, but never once at Robin. Stop, said the outlaw. What do you mean by running over a wayfarer? Why should I stop, good fellow? Said the stranger in a smooth voice, looking at Robin for the first time. Because I asked you to, replied Robin. And who may you be? Asked the other coolly. My name does not matter, said Robin, but I am a public tax gatherer. If your purse has more than just a number of shillings, I must lighten it some, for there are many worthy people around here who have less than the just amount. Therefore, kind sir, hand over your purse, that I may judge its weight. The Scarlet Stranger smiled sweetly, as though a lady were paying him a compliment. Your speech amuses me greatly, he said calmly. Pray continue, if you are not done, for I am in no hurry this morning. I have said all that is needed, retorted Robin, beginning to grow red. None the less, I have other arguments that may not be so pleasing to your dainty skin. Stand and deliver. I promise to deal fairly with your purse. Alas, said the stranger, with a little shrug of his shoulders, I am deeply sorrowed that I cannot show my purse to every rogue who asks to see it. But I really could not. I need every penny it contains. Pray stand aside. Nay, I will not, and it will go harder with you if you do not yield at once. Good fellow, said the other gently, have I not listened to you with patience? Now, that is all I have promised to do. My conscience is clear, and I must go on my way. Hold, I say, said Robin hotly, for he knew Little John must be chuckling at this behind the bushes. Or else I shall bloody those fair locks of yours, and he swung his quarterstaff threateningly. Alas, moaned the stranger, shaking his head. Now I shall have to run this fellow through with my sword, and I had hoped to be a peaceable man from now on. And sighing deeply, he drew his shining blade. Put away your weapon, said Robin. 'Tis too pretty a piece of steel to get cracked with a common oak cudgel. And that is what would happen on the first pass I made at you. Get a stick like mine out of the undergrowth, and we will fight fairly, man to man. The stranger thought a moment and eyed Robin from head to foot. Then he unbuckled his scabbard, laid it and the sword aside, and walked deliberately over to the oak thicket. Choosing from among the saplings, he found a stout little tree to his liking. He laid hold of it, without stopping to cut it, and gave a tug. Up it came, root and all, as though it were a stalk of corn, and the stranger walked back, trimming it quietly, as if pulling up trees were the easiest thing in the world. From his hiding place, Little John saw the feat. By Our Lady, he muttered to himself, I'm glad not be in Master Robin's boots. Whatever Robin thought upon seeing the stranger's strength, he did not utter a word nor budge an inch. Then back and forth the fighters swayed, their cudgels pounding, knocking off splinters and bark and threatening to break bone, muscle, and skin. Back and forth they pranced, kicking up a cloud of dust and gasping for fresh air. 3 times Robin struck the Scarlet Man with blows that would have bowled over an ordinary man. Only twice did the Scarlet Man hit Robin, but the second blow was enough to finish him. The first had been delivered over the knuckles, and thought it was a glancing stroke. It almost broke Robin's fingers, so that he could not easily raise his staff again. And while he was dancing about in pain, the other staff came swinging through the dust cloud, zip, and struck him under the arm. Down went Robin as though he were a bowling pin, flat down into the dust of the road. But despite the pain, he was getting up again to fight on, when Little John interfered. Hold, said he, bursting out of the bushes and seizing the stranger's weapon. Hold, I say. I would not strike him while he was down, answered the stranger quietly. But if there is a nest of you hatching here, cluck out the other chicks, and I'll fight them all. Not for all the deer in Sherwood, cried Robin. I'll fight you no more, for I feel truly sore in wrist and body, nor shall any of mine molest you. In fact, Robin did not look good. His clothes were coated with dirt. One of his hose had slipped, half was down from his knee. The sleeve of his jerkin was split, and his face was streaked with sweat and dirt. Little John eyed him with amusement. A jerkin is a leather vest that covered his hips. Now, good master, said he, the sport you kicked up has left you in a sorry state. Let me dust your coat off. Let me dust your coat for you. It has been dusted enough already, replied Robin, and I now believe the scripture saying that all men are made of dust, for it has sifted me through and lined my throat an inch deep. And he went to the brook, drank deep, and washed his face and hands. All this time the stranger had been eyeing Robin attentively and listening to his voice, as though striving to recall it. If I'm not mistaken, he said at last, you are the famous outlaw, Robin Hood. You are right, replied Robin, but my fame has tumbled sadly about in the dust today. Now, why did I not know you at once? Continued the stranger. This battle did not need to happen, for I came to find you today and thought I could remember your face and voice. Do you not know me, Rob? Have you ever been to Gamewell Lodge? Will Gamewell? My dear cousin Will Gamewell? Shouted Robin, throwing his arms about Will with affection. What a clod I was not to recognize you. But it has been years since we parted, and your schooling has polished you up greatly. Will embraced his cousin no less happily. We are equal on not knowing our relatives, he said, for you have changed and strengthened much from the boy I used to run races with in old Sherwood. But why do you seek me? Asked Robin. You know I'm an outlaw and dangerous company. How is my uncle? And have you heard of Maid Marian lately? Your last question first, answered Will, laughingly. I saw Maid Marian not long after the great shooting match at Nottingham, when you won her the golden arrow. She prizes it among her dearest possessions, though it has made her an enemy of the sheriff's proud daughter. Maid Marian asked me to tell you, if I ever saw you, that she must return to Queen Eleanor's court, but she can never forget the happy days in Sherwood. As for the old squire, he is still strong and hearty. He speaks of you as a sad young dog, but is secretly proud of your skill with the bow and of the way you are pestering the sheriff. 'Twas for my father's sake that I am now an outlaw like yourself. He had a steward, a surly fellow, who, while I was away at school, bootlooked his way into favor until he lorded it over the whole house. Then he grew right saucy and defiant, but my father ignored it. He thought the fellow indispensable in managing the estate. When I came back, it irked me to see the fellow strut about as though he owned the place. He was sly enough with me at first and would browbeat the squire only while I was out of earshot. It happened one day, however, that I heard loud voices through an open window and paused to listen. That wicked servant called my father a meddling old fool. You are a fool and meddler yourself, I shouted, springing through the window. Take that for your impudence. And I struck him a heavier blow than I intended, for I have some strength in mine arm. The fellow rolled over and never breathed again. I think I broke his neck. I knew that the sheriff would use this as a reason to hound my father if I stayed, so I told him I would seek you in Sherwood. For a man escaping the law, you took it about as coolly as one could wish, said Robin. To see you come along decked out in all your plumage, one would think you had not a care in the world. Indeed, I remarked to Little John here that I hoped your purse was not as light as your heart. Perhaps you meant head, laughed Will. And is this Little John? Shake hands with me, if you will, and promise me to cross a staff with me in friendly bout some day. That will I, said Little John heartily. Here's my hand on it. What is your last name again? 'Tis to be changed, interjected Robin, to confuse the men looking for him. Ah, I have it. In Scarlet he came to us, and that shall be his name. Welcome to Sherwood, Will Scarlet. Aye, welcome, Will Scarlet, said Little John, and they all clasped hands again and swore to be true each to other. Sorry, let me read that. Aye, welcome, Will Scarlet, said Little John, and they all clasped hands again and swore to be true each to the other. All right, that was chapter 6. Let's get into chapter 7, and then we'll do chapter 8, and that will be it for today. So we just read how they met, or how Will Scarlet became a part of the Merry Men. Robin fought him before he knew that it was his cousin Will, and we learned how Will became an outlaw. So now let's learn how Robin Hood met Friar Tuck. The friar took Robin on his back, deep water he did bestride, and spoke neither good word nor bad, till he came at the other side. It had been Robin Hood's custom to pick out the best men in all the countryside. Whenever he heard of someone noting for skill in any feat of arms, he would seek the man and test him in a personal encounter. which did not always end happily for Robin, just like we read with Will. At least in the part that he got beat, it was happy that found out it was his cousin. And when he had found a man to his liking, he offered him a place with his band of outlaws. Thus it came about that one day after archery practice, in which Little John struck down a stag 500 feet away, Robin Hood began to boast. "I would travel 100 miles to find one who could match you," he cried, clapping the burly fellow on the shoulder. At this, Will Scarlet laughed roundly. "There's a friar living in Fountain's Abbey, Tuck by name, who can beat both him and you," he said. Robin pricked up his ears. "By Our Lady," he said, "I'll neither eat nor drink till I see this friar." He set about arming himself for the adventure at once. On his head he placed a cap of steel. Underneath his Lincoln green he wore a coat of chainmail. We learned about chainmail before. It's flexible armor made of small interlocked metal rings that offered protection from arrows and swords. And with a sword and buckler strapped at his side, he made a good show. A buckler is a small round shield held at arm's length by a handle. He also took with him his bow and a sheaf of arrows. He pressed forward by winding ways till he came to a green, broad pasture land at whose edge flowed a stream with willows and rushes on the banks. It flowed calmly, as though it had some depth in the middle. Robin did not fancy getting his feet wet or his fine suit of chainmail rusted, so he paused on the bank to rest and take his bearings. As he sat quietly under the shade of a drooping willow, he heard snatches of a merry song from the other side, then the sound of two men's voices arguing. One was describing the merits of hasty pudding, and hasty pudding is boiled oatmeal or porridge, and the other strongly preferred meat pie, especially, said this one, when flavored with young onions. "Gramercy," muttered Robin to himself, "that is tantalizing speech to a hungry man." Tantalizing, as in Greek mythology, Tantalus was a king who was favored by the gods and invited to their feasts. He betrayed their secrets to humans and roasted his own son to feed to them in order to test their divine knowledge. As punishment, he was tortured with eternal hunger and thirst. He was sent to the underworld and stood in water up to his neck. If he tried to drink, the water sank away. A branch of fruit hung above him, and if he tried to reach it, wind lifted the branch away. The word tantalize comes from his name and means to tempt. But in truth the voices seemed curiously alike. Presently the willows parted on the other bank, and Robin could hardly resist laughing outright. The mystery was explained. It was not two men who had done all this singing and talking, but one, a fat friar sitting by the water's edge, who wore a long coat over his round frame. Tied with a cord in the middle, on his head was a knight's helmet, and in his hand was a huge meat pie. First the friar took off his helmet. His head was as round as an apple. A fringe of short, curly black hair grew round the base of his skull, but the crown of his head was as bare and shiny as an egg. His cheeks were smooth, red and shiny, and his little green eyes danced about with the funniest air imaginable. Good humor and fat living stood out all over him, yet for all that he looked able to take care of himself with any man, his short neck was thick like that of a bull, his shoulders were set far back, and his arms sprouted from them like two oak limbs. As he sat down, the cloak fell open, revealing a sword and buckler like Robin's. Robin's heart fell within him when he saw the meat pie, which was about to be devoured before his very eyes. The friar lost no time in thrusting one hand deep into the pie, while he crossed himself with the other. Cross himself is a gesture called the sign of the cross made by Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Anglican Christians. One traces the form of a cross between the forehead, chest, and shoulders to remember Jesus' death on the cross and to ask for God's blessing. So he was eating the pie, and while he was eating the pie, he did the cross to give thanks and bless the food. Thereupon, Robin seized his bow and fitted a shaft. "Hey, friar," he sang out, "carry me over the water, or else I cannot answer for your safety." The friar was startled by the unexpected greeting, and laid his hand upon his sword. Then he saw Robin's arrow pointing at him. "Put down your bow, fellow," he shouted back, "and I will bring you over the brook. It is our duty in life to help each other, and your arrow shows me that you are a man worthy of attention." So the friar got up gravely, though his eyes twinkled with a cunning light, laid aside his pie and his cloak and his sword and his buckler, and waded across the stream with a waddling dignity. Then he took Robin Hood upon his back and spoke neither good word nor bad till he came to the other side. Robin leaped lightly off his back and said, I am much beholden to you, good father. Beholden, you say, answered the friar, drawing his sword. Then, by my faith, you shall repay your debt. Now, my own affairs, which are of a spiritual kind and much more important than yours, lie on the other side of the stream. You seem to be a man who would not refuse to serve the church. Therefore, I pray of you that whatever I have done for you, you will also do for me. In short, you must carry me back again. This was said courteously enough, but so suddenly had the friar drawn his sword that Robin had no time to unsling his bow from his back, where he had placed it to avoid getting it wet, or to unfasten his sword, so he stalled. But father, I shall get my feet wet. Are your feet any better than mine? Said the other. I fear that I am already so wet that I shall get rheumatic pains as a penance. Rheumatic pain is pain caused by swelling in the muscles or joints. I am not as strong as you, continued Robin. That sword and buckler would be my undoing on the uncertain footing in the stream, to say nothing of your holy flesh and bones. Then I will lighten up somewhat, replied the friar calmly. Promise to carry me across, and I will lay aside my war gear. Agreed, said Robin, and he took him up as he had promised. Now the stones at the bottom of the stream were round and slippery, and the current swept along strongly, waist deep in the middle. Robin had a heavier load than the friar had carried. He did not know the ford, so he went stumbling along, stepping into a deep hole, stumbling over a boulder, and nearly plunging them both into the current. But the fat friar hung on and dug his heels into Robin's ribs, as he were riding in a tournament. Sweat ran down Robin, and he gasped like the winded man he was. But at last he managed to stagger out onto the bank. No sooner had he sat the friar down than Robin seized his own sword. Now, holy friar, he said, panting, what do the scriptures say? Be not weary of doing good. You must carry me back again, or I swear that I will make a cheesecloth out of your jacket. Cheesecloth is a cloth so loosely woven that liquids easily drain through it, making cheese. The friar's gray eyes once more twinkled with a gleam that boded no good to Robin, but his voice was as calm and courteous as ever. Your wits are keen, my son, he said, and the waters of the stream have not quenched your spirit. Once more will I bend my back and carry the weight of the haughty. So Robin mounted again in glee and carried his sword in hand. But while he was thinking of what he would say when he arrived on the other side, he felt himself slipping from the friar's back. He clutched frantically to save himself, but the surface was too round to grasp. He was hampered by his weapon, so down he went with a loud splash into the middle of the stream, where the crafty friar had carried him. There, said the holy man, you choose, my fine fellow, whether you will sink or swim. And he reached his own bank without more ado, while Robin thrashed about until he managed to grasp a willow branch and haul himself ashore on the opposite side. Robin's rage was furious. He took his bow and his arrows and let fly one shaft after another at the friar, but they rattled harmlessly off his steel buckler, while he laughed as if they were hailstones. Shoot on, he sang out. So Robin shot until all his arrows were gone. You villain, he shouted, come within reach of my sword, and friar or not, I'll shave you closer than a bald monk was ever shaved before. Soft, said the friar calmly. Hard words are cheap, and you may need your wind presently. If you would like a bout with swords, meet me halfway in the stream. And the friar waded into the brook, sword in hand, where he was met halfway by the hot-headed outlaw. Then began a fierce battle. Up and down, in and out, back and forth they fought. The swords flashed in the rays of the declining sun, and then met with a clash that would have shivered less sturdy weapons or disarmed less sturdy men. Many blows were landed, but each man wore an undercoat of linked mail that could not be pierced. Nonetheless, their ribs ached at the force of the blows. Twice they paused, caught their breath, and looked hard each at the other. Never before had either met so strong a fellow. Finally, during a furious exchange, Robin stepped on a rolling stone and went down on his knees, but the friar would not take this advantage. He paused until Robin could get up. "Now, by Our Lady," cried the outlaw, using his favorite expression, "you are the best swordsman I've met in many a long day. I beg a favor of you." "What is it?" said the other. "Allow me to blow 3 blasts on my horn." "Blow till your breath fails," said the friar. Then Robin Hood blew 3 blasts, and 50 men came racing over the hillside. "Whose men are these?" said the friar. "Mine," said Robin Hood, feeling that his time to laugh had come at last. Then the friar said in his turn, "And will you grant me a favor like I gave to you? Allow me to whistle 3 times." "That I will do," said Robin, "or else I lack courtesy." The friar put the horn to shame by the piercing whistles he blew. 50 powerful dogs came running and jumping so swiftly that they reached their bank as soon as Robin Hood's men had reached his side. Then Stuteley, Much, Little John, and the other outlaws sent arrows whistling towards the opposite bank. But the dogs, well trained by the friar, dodged the missiles cleverly and fetched them back again in their mouths, just as dogs catch the sticks. "I've never seen the like of this in all my days," cried Little John, amazed. "It's witchcraft." "Take off your dogs, Friar Tuck," shouted Will Scarlet, who had just then run up and now stood laughing heartily at the scene. "Friar Tuck!" exclaimed Robin, astounded. "Are you Friar Tuck? Then am I your friend. For you are the man I came to find." "I am but a poor anchorite," meaning someone who lives alone as a hermit, usually for religious reasons, he said, whistling to his pack, "called Friar Tuck of Fountain's-Dale. For 7 years have I attended the abbey here, preached on Sundays, married and christened and buried folk, and fought too if it were needed. And if it does not smack too much of boasting, I have not yet met the man that I would yield to, but I would like to know who you are." "Robin Hood, the outlaw, has been assisting you at this christening," said Will Scarlet, glancing at the 2 men's dripping garments, and the whole band burst into a shout of laughter, in which Robin and Friar Tuck joined. "Robin Hood," cried the good friar, holding his sides, "are you indeed that famous yeoman? Then I, like you, well, and had known you earlier, I would have both carried you across and shared my pastry pie with you." "To speak truly," replied Robin gaily, "'twas that same pie that led me to be rude. Now bring it and your dogs and go with us to Sherwood Forest. We have need of you. We will build you a hermitage, and you shall keep us from evil ways. Will you join our band?" "That I will," cried Friar Tuck. Right. I feel like they should maybe ask who people's names are before they fight, because it seems like that's a kind of a common thing lately. They fight someone that they're looking for. But I guess that's kind of the adventure, right? Fight and then ask questions later. All right, chapter 8, our last chapter, okay? And then we are done for this part. Again, if you need to take a break, if you're just reading 1 chapter a day, this is the time to pause the video and then come back. We will be reading chapter 8 right now, and then part 2 we'll have chapters 9 and 10, and that will be our chapters for this week. All right, and that will help us stay on top and caught up with our literature section. So let us read chapter 8, how Alan a Dale's courting was aided. "What is thy name?" then said Robin Hood. "Come tell me without any fail." "By the faith o' my body," then said the young man, "my name 'tis Alan a Dale." Friar Tuck and Much, the miller's son, became good friends over the steaming stew they cooked together for the merry men that evening. Tuck was mightily pleased when he found a man in the force who cooked so well, while Much marveled at the friar's knowledge of herbs and woodland things that flavored a stew greatly. So they gabbed together like 2 old gossips, and, between them, made such a tasty meal that Robin Hood and his followers seemed as if they would never stop eating. And the friar said grace, too, over the food, and Robin said, "Amen." And from then on they always had Mass on Sundays. Mass is the religious service of the Roman Catholic Church. We've talked about that in history. Robin walked in the wood that evening with his stomach full and his heart, therefore full of love for other men. He did not stop the first passerby as he often did. Instead, he stepped behind a tree when he heard a man's voice singing and waited. Like Will Scarlet, this fellow was clad in scarlet, though he did not look quite as fine a gentleman. He was a sturdy yeoman of honest face, with a voice far sweeter than Will's. He seemed to be a strolling minstrel. A minstrel Minstrels were traveling singers and poets who usually also played the harp. We talked about that in history as well. Sometimes they have ballads. He carried a harp in his hand, which he strummed, while his tenor voice rang out with, "A down, a down, a down, I've a lassie back in town. Come day, come night, come dark or light, she will wed me back in town." Robin let the singer pass. "'Tis not in me to disturb a lover this night," he muttered as a memory of Marian came back to him. "May their wedding be a happy one." So Robin went back to his camp, where he told of the minstrel. "If any of you set eyes on him after this," he said finally, "bring him to me, for I wish to talk with him." The very next day his wish was answered. Little John and Much, the miller's son, were out together on a hunting expedition when they spied the same young man. At least they thought it must be he, for he was clad in scarlet and carried a harp in his hand. But now he came drooping along, his clothes all in tatters. At every step he sighted Little John and Much stepped forward. No sooner did the young man catch sight of them than he bent his bow and held an arrow back to his ear. "Stand off," he said. "What do you want with me?" "Put down your weapon," said Much. "We will not harm you, but you must come before our master under his oak tree." So the minstrel put down his bow and allowed himself to be led to Robin Hood. "How now," said Robin, when he saw the minstrel's sorry look. "Are you not the one I heard yesterday singing so cheerfully about a lassie back in the town?" "The same in body, sir," replied the other sadly, "but my spirit is sadly changed." "Tell me your tale," said Robin. "Perhaps I can help you." "Now man on earth can do that, I fear," said the stranger, "but I'll tell you the tale. Yesterday I stood pledged to a maid and thought I would marry her soon, but she has been taken from me and is to become an old knight's bride this very day. As for me, I do not care what happens to me or how soon without her." "Be brave," said Robin. "How did the old knight get this sudden advantage?" "This way. The Normans overrun us." Normans are people of the Scandinavian descent who occupied Normandy, a region of France in the 10th century. England was conquered by Normans in 1066. "So this way the Normans overrun us, and no one can oppose them. This old crusader coveted the land where my lady dwells. The estate is not large, but it is all her own. Knowing this, her brother says she must marry a nobleman who has a title, and he and the old knight have fixed it up for today." "But surely," began Robin. "Hear me out, sir," said the minstrel. "Perhaps you think me a sorry dog not to make fight of this, but the old knight cannot be reached. I threw one of his varlets into a thorn hedge." A varlet is a servant of bad character. "And another into a water barrel, and a third head first into a ditch, but I couldn't do any fighting at all. "Does the maid love you?" asked Robin. "She says she loves me right well," said the minstrel. "I have a little ring of hers which I have kept for 7 long years." "What is your name?" said Robin then. "Allan a Dale," replied the young man. "What will you give me, Allan a Dale?" said Robin Hood. "And ready gold to deliver your true love to you again?" "I have only 5 shillings," said Allan. "But are you not Robin Hood?" Robin nodded. "Then you, if anyone, can aid me," said Allan a Dale eagerly. "And if you give me back my love, I swear I will serve you truly forever." "Where is this wedding to take place, and when?" asked Robin. "At Plympton Church, scarcely 5 miles from here, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon." "Then Plympton we will go," cried Robin, suddenly springing into action. He gave out orders like a general. "Will Stuteley, have 24 men over at Plympton Church at 3 this afternoon. Much, cook up some porridge for this youth. Will Scarlet, you will see to dressing him for his wedding. And Friar Tuck, be ready, good book in hand, at the church. Perhaps you had better go ahead of us all." The fat bishop of Hereford was full of pomp that the day at Plympton Church. He was to celebrate the marriage of old Sir Stephen, a returned crusader, and a young woman. All the gentry in the vicinity were to attend. The church itself was gaily decorated with flowers for the ceremony, while out in the churchyard at one side brown ale flowed freely for all the servants. The guests were beginning to assemble, when the bishop saw a minstrel clad in green walk up boldly to the door and peer in. It was Robin Hood, who had borrowed Allan's harp. "Who are you, fellow?" said the bishop, "and what do you want here?" "May it please your reverence," returned Robin, bowing very humbly, I am but a strolling musician, called the best in the whole North Country, and I hope my strumming might add pleasure to the wedding today. What tune can you play? Demanded the bishop. I can play a tune so merry that a sad lover will forget he is jilted, said Robin. I can play another tune that will make a bride leave her lord at the altar. I can play another tune that will bring loving souls together, each though they were 5 miles away from each other. Then welcome, minstrel, said the bishop. You guys catch that he kind of gave the bishop his plan for how he's going to kind of break the wedding up and help the wedding between Alan and the woman. So then welcome, minstrel, said the bishop. Music pleases me right well, and if you can play up to your talk, it will indeed grace our ceremony. Let us have a sample of your playing. Nay, I must not pluck string until the bride and groom have come. As you will, said the bishop. Then up the lane to the church came the old knight slowly, leaning on a cane, followed by 10 archers outfitted in scarlet and gold. After them came a sweet lass leaning on her brother's arm. Her hair was like glistening gold, and her eyes were like blue violets that peep out shyly at the sun. Her complexion had the tinting of a she-shell, and her face was flushed as though she had been crying. But she walked with a proud air, as though she defied the world to crush her spirit. She had 2 maids with her. One held the bride's gown off the ground, and the other carried flowers. Now, by all the wedding bells that ever were rung, said Robin boldly, this is the worst matched pair that my eyes ever beheld. Silence, said a man who stood near. The bishop had hurriedly donned his gown and stood ready to meet the couple, but Robin paid no attention to him. He let the knight and his 10 archers pass by. Then he walked up to the bride. Courage, lady, he whispered. There is another minstrel near who may play more to your liking. The lady glanced at him with a frightened look, but read such honesty and kindness in his glance that she brightened and gave him a grateful look. Stand aside, fool, cried her brother angrily. Nay, I bring good fortune to the bride, said Robin laughingly, and he was allowed to walk by her side up to the altar. Now strike up your music, fellow, ordered the bishop. Right, gladly, said Robin, if you will let me choose my instrument, for sometimes I like the harp, and other times I think the horn makes the merriest music in all the world. And he drew his bugle from underneath his green cloak and blew 3 notes that made the church rafters ring. Seize him, yelled the bishop. These are Robin Hood's tricks. Then 10 archers rushed forward from the rear of the church where they had been stationed, but they were blocked by the onlookers who rose from their pews in alarm and crowded the aisles. Meanwhile, Robin leaped lightly over the altar rail and stationed himself in a nook by the altar. Stand where you are, he shouted, drawing his bow. The first man to pass the rail dies, and all you who have come to witness a wedding stay in your seats. We shall have one, but the bride shall choose her own groom. Then there was another great commotion at the door, and Robin's men came marching in, with Will Stuteley at their head. They seized the 10 archers and the bride's scowling brother and bound them as prisoners. Then in came Alan a Dale with Will Scarlet for his best man, and they walked solemnly down the aisle and stood at the altar. Before maiden weds, she chooses, said Robin. Now, maiden, whom will you have as your husband? She answered not in words, but smiled with a glad light in her eyes, walked over to Alan, and clasped her arms around his neck. That is her true love, said Robin, and the true lovers shall be married at this time. Now, my lord bishop, proceed with the ceremony. That shall not be, protested the bishop. The banns must be carried 3 times in the church. Such is the law of our land. Banns is an announcement in church of a proposed marriage, usually made weekly for 3 weeks. Come here, Little John, called Robin impatiently, and he pulled off the bishop's frock from his back and put it on Little John. You're the finest bishop that ever I saw in my life, said Robin. Now, cried the banns. So Little John climbed awkwardly into the choir, and he called the banns for the marriage of the maid and Alan a Dale once, twice, and thrice. Good enough, said Robin. Now, I see a worthy friar in the back of this church, who can say a better service than my lord bishop of Hereford. My lord bishop shall be a witness and seal the papers, but you, good friar, bless this pair with your book and candle. So Friar Took, who had been back in one corner of the church all along, came forward. Alan and his maid kneeled before him, while the old knight, held unwilling as a witness, gnashed his teeth in helpless rage. The friar began the ceremony. When he asked, Who gives this woman? Robin stepped up and answered in a clear voice, I do. I, Robin Hood of Sherwood, and anyone who takes her from Alnadale shall pay dearly. And so the two were declared man and wife. All right. So there is Robin Hood, chapters 6 through 8. A lot of fun and adventurous, and Robin helping those that are less fortunate and helping those that love each other actually end up being together. I enjoyed reading that. Hope you did. I will see you guys in chapters 9 and 10, okay? See you in the next video.